The city of New York was alive at night, its skyline glowing like a sea of stars, the streets bustling with life, and the luxurious Regal Crown Hotel standing tall in the heart of it all. Inside, the grand lobby buzzed with the soft hum of conversation, clinking glasses, and the occasional burst of laughter from well-dressed guests indulging in the hotel's finest champagne. Lily Harper barely noticed any of it. Her head was spinning, her cheeks warm from the countless drinks she had downed at her best friend's bachelorette party. What started as a casual celebration had quickly escalated into a night of endless toasts, bottomless glasses of wine, and shots of expensive tequila that burned down her throat. Now, swaying slightly in her high heels, she wobbled her way toward the elevators, blinking hard to steady her vision. "Room 666, room 666. That's mine, right?" she mumbled to herself, squinting at the key card in her hand. The elevator dinged, and she stumbled out, dragging her fingers against the cool walls of the hallway for balance. When she finally reached her supposed room, she blinked at the glowing golden numbers on the dark mahogany door. 999. Her foggy mind failed to register the mistake. The numbers were just flipped upside down. Close enough. With an exaggerated sigh of relief, she swiped the keycard, which miraculously worked thanks to a faulty system, and pushed the door open. Inside, the air smelled rich, of whiskey and expensive cologne. The suite was dimly lit, casting deep shadows across the pristine white sheets of the massive bed. She barely registered the sound of someone shifting inside before she kicked off her heels and stumbled toward the mattress, her body begging for rest. Then, a deep, groggy voice rumbled through the darkness. "Finally!" Lily froze. Her hazy brain struggled to make sense of the situation. Was someone already in her room? Before she could react, a figure stirred from the other side of the bed. A man. The warm glow of the bedside lamp flickered as he turned over, revealing tousled dark hair, sharp cheekbones, and a well-defined jawline. His dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and the faint scent of bourbon lingered in the air around him. Even in her intoxicated state, Lily could tell one thing. He was dangerously attractive. The man ran a hand through his disheveled hair, his silver watch glinting under the light. He looked just as drunk as she was. His deep, husky voice broke through the silence. "Took you long enough?" Lily's eyes widened. Took her long enough for what? But before she could respond, the alcohol-fueled exhaustion pulled her down. The last thing she remembered before everything went black was the sensation of the mattress dipping beside her and the sound of a low chuckle. The night, it seemed, was far from over. The moment Lily Harper collapsed onto the bed, her world tilted in a haze of alcohol and warmth. She barely registered the strong arms that instinctively pulled her closer, nor the intoxicating scent of whiskey and expensive cologne that surrounded her. A deep chuckle rumbled through the quiet room. "You're finally here," the man murmured, his voice husky from the alcohol, but tinged with something else, something almost relieved. Lily barely had time to react before warm lips brushed against her skin. A spark ignited in her drunken mind, the lines of reality blurring under the golden glow of the bedside lamp. The man's touch was confident yet hesitant, as if unsure whether this moment was a dream or reality. Somewhere in the back of her mind, Lily knew this was a mistake. But as strong hands traced over her waist, pulling her flush against a toned body, her thoughts melted into the warmth of his embrace. The room felt too small, the space between them disappearing entirely as his lips found hers. And just like that, the night dissolved into a whirlwind of tangled sheets, breathless whispers, and a passion neither of them could fight. Sunlight streamed through the massive windows of the luxury penthouse suite, casting golden streaks across the pristine white sheets. Lily groaned softly, her head pounding from the remnants of last night's indulgence. Her body ached in places she didn't even know could ache. The moment she shifted, memories came crashing down, hot kisses, desperate touches, whispered names in the dark. Her heart stopped. What have I done? She turned her head slightly, and there he was. The man, Alexander Knight, slept peacefully beside her, his dark hair tousled, his strong arm draped lazily over her waist as if he had no intention of letting her go. The CEO of Knight Enterprises, a man who was way out of her league, and someone she had absolutely no business being in bed with. Panic shot through her veins. She needed to leave. Now, carefully, she slid out from under his arm, biting her lip as he stirred slightly but didn't wake. She grabbed the nearest robe, tying it hastily around herself, and scanned the room for her clothes. The moment she spotted her dress, a crumpled mess near the foot of the bed, she rushed toward it, hastily slipping it on while suppressing the rush of memories that tried to surface. Her hands shook as she reached for her purse. She needed to disappear before he woke up, and reality came crashing down. With one last glance at the man sleeping soundly in the bed they had shared, Lily slipped out of the hotel room without a sound. The sound of a phone buzzing woke Alexander Knight from his deep sleep. His brows furrowed slightly as he reached for the device, but something felt off. The bed beside him was empty. His silver eyes snapped open. The warmth of the woman from last night was gone. He sat up, scanning the room, expecting to see her standing near the window or getting dressed. But she wasn't there. His jaw clenched. She left. For a man like Alexander Knight, people didn't just leave him. Running a hand through his tousled hair, he let out a low curse before grabbing his phone and immediately calling the hotel's reception. The woman who stayed in my suite last night, Lily Harper. Where is she? A brief silence. Then, the receptionist's hesitant voice came through. I'm sorry, Mr. Knight, but the guest checked out earlier this morning. Alexander's grip on the phone tightened. She ran. His gaze darkened, a slow smirk forming on his lips. Interesting. Nobody walked away from him. If Lily Harper thought she could disappear after last night, she was dead wrong. Alexander Knight sat in his private office, his fingers drumming against the polished oak desk, his jaw clenched as he stared at the untouched glass of whiskey in front of him. It had been 2 days since that night. 2 days since he had woken up to an empty bed. 2 days since Lily Harper disappeared. And now, after exhausting every resource at his disposal, he finally had an answer. Or rather, a problem. The voice of his most trusted assistant, Daniel, echoed through the dimly lit room. Sir, we've confirmed it. Lily Harper left the country early this morning. She's already in Paris. Alexander's fingers tightened around his glass. She ran. Not just from him. From everything. His silver eyes darkened, his smirk fading as a sharp wave of frustration coursed through him. She actually left. A woman had never walked away from him before, never disappeared before he could even say his piece. Yet Lily Harper had done just that. She had slipped through his fingers like a ghost. He exhaled sharply, pushing the glass aside before leaning back in his chair, his mind working at lightning speed. She thought leaving the country would be enough. Did she really believe she could escape him? Alexander wasn't a man who let things go, and Lily Harper had no idea what she had just started. 5 years later, the airport was alive with movement. Passengers rushing to their gates, families reuniting with joyful embraces, the constant hum of announcements echoing through the grand terminal. But for Lily Harper, the world around her felt still. She took a slow breath, stepping past the arrival gates, the familiar scent of fresh coffee, jet fuel, and nostalgia filling her lungs. 5 years. It had been 5 years since she left this place behind, escaping the city, the past, and most of all, him. But now she was back, and this time she wasn't alone. A small, warm hand slipped into hers. "Mommy, is this where you grew up?" Lily glanced down at the little boy walking beside her, her heart tightening at the sight of his innocent curiosity. Tousled black hair, striking silver eyes that mirrored the man she had tried to forget. Her son. Her biggest secret. She smiled gently, kneeling to adjust the hood of his tiny coat. "Yes, sweetheart. This is home." He blinked up at her, his small fingers tightening around hers. "Will we meet Daddy here?" The question hit her like a jolt of lightning. Lily's breath caught in her throat. She had prepared for this moment, yet somehow hearing it aloud made the reality all too real. She forced a soft laugh, ruffling his hair. "We'll see, baby. First, let's settle in, okay?" Theo nodded, his trust in her absolute. But Lily knew better. She wasn't the same reckless girl who had stumbled into Alexander Knight's world all those years ago. She had become someone stronger, someone fierce, independent, and successful in her own right. Paris had shaped her into one of the most sought-after fashion designers in the world. She had built a life for herself and her son, one without the shadow of a man who had once turned her world upside down. And yet, fate had a cruel sense of humor. Because no matter how much she told herself that she had left the past behind, Alexander Knight was never the kind of man you could truly escape. And the moment he found out about Theo, the storm she had avoided for 5 years would come crashing down upon her, whether she was ready or not. The city skyline loomed beyond the tinted windows of the black limousine as Alexander Knight leaned back against the leather seat, his gaze fixed on the stack of reports before him. 5 years had passed, yet nothing had ever caught him off guard. Until now. His assistant, Daniel, sat opposite him, shifting uneasily. "Sir, we have a situation." Alexander's silver eyes flickered upward, his patience razor-thin. "Then handle it." Daniel hesitated, then slid a tablet across the seat. "You'll want to see this yourself." With a frown, Alexander picked up the device, his jaw tightening as the screen loaded an image taken at the airport just hours ago. The first thing he saw was her. Lily Harper. His grip on the tablet turned vice-like. After all these years, after she had vanished without a trace, she was back. A hurricane of emotions threatened to surface. Rage, betrayal, something else he refused to name. But it wasn't just Lily. There was a boy standing beside her, holding her hand. And then his world stopped. Black hair, silver eyes, his silver eyes. The resemblance was unmistakable. His chest tightened as a realization crashed into him with the force of a tidal wave. The boy was his. His pulse pounded in his ears, his grip tightening around the tablet. 5 years. She had kept this from him for 5 damn years. Daniel's voice was cautious, as if sensing the fury rising beneath Alexander's controlled exterior. "What do you want me to do, sir?" Silence filled the car, thick with tension. Then Alexander's voice came, low and dangerously quiet. "Find her. Now." The grand ballroom of the luxury hotel was bathed in golden light, the hum of conversations blending seamlessly with the soft melody of the grand piano. It was an exclusive business symposium where the most powerful minds in fashion, investment, and corporate empires gathered. For Lily Harper, this was her moment. 5 years ago, she had left this city as a nobody. Now she returned as a name the fashion world couldn't ignore. Standing confidently in an elegant black gown, she held a champagne flute in her hand, conversing with investors, effortlessly charming the crowd. And then, the room shifted. Or maybe she did. Because the moment she saw him, the breath in her lungs vanished. Alexander Knight, the man she had tried to erase from her memory, the man who had once owned her heart, the man whose son she had hidden for 5 years. He stood at the far end of the room, dressed in a sharp black suit, his aura of power and dominance demanding attention. Their eyes met, and in that single second, the past came crashing down. Lily's grip on her champagne tightened. She needed to leave. But before she could move, another voice called her name. "Lily!" She turned sharply, and there he was, Ethan Carter, her best friend, the man who had loved her in silence for years. Dressed in a tailored navy suit, his warm brown eyes flickered with relief and admiration. He reached for her hand, squeezing it just a little too tightly. "I was looking for you. I didn't think you'd make it." Lily forced a smile. "Of course I wouldn't miss it." But Ethan wasn't looking at her anymore. His gaze had shifted past her, to Alexander. And just like that, the battlefield was set. "Lily!" Her pulse skipped as Alexander's voice wrapped around her name. Smooth, deep, unmistakable. She swallowed hard before turning to face him. "Mr. Knight." His silver eyes darkened at the formality. "It's been a while." Before she could respond, Ethan stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of her. "Lily, is this man bothering you?" His voice was calm, but his stance was protective. Alexander's smirk barely faltered, but his gaze flicked to Ethan, assessing him like a predator sizing up competition. "And you are?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Someone who actually cares about her." Tension crackled between them, the two men locking eyes in an unspoken challenge. Lily exhaled sharply, stepping between them. "Enough." She turned to Alexander, trying to rein in her emotions. "Why are you here?" Alexander's smirk returned. "Business, of course." She didn't believe him. Not for a second. And when he reached into his pocket and handed her a contract, her stomach dropped. Knight Enterprises was offering Harper Atelier a collaboration deal. Lily's hands shook as she skimmed the document. This wasn't a coincidence. He had planned this. He was forcing her into his world again. Her lips parted, a protest forming. But then, she hesitated. This was an opportunity. A merger with Knight Enterprises could bring her brand to a level she had never dreamed of. But working with Alexander? It was dangerous, because she knew one thing for certain. When you played with fire, you always got burned, and Alexander Knight had always been her fire. Days later, the deal was signed. Lily told herself it was just business, but Ethan didn't believe that. Standing in her office, he slammed the papers onto the desk, his frustration barely contained. "Tell me you didn't just sign a deal with him." Lily sighed, rubbing her temples. "Ethan, it's just business." His brown eyes flashed with anger. "It's never just business with him. He wants you back, Lily." She froze, because deep down she knew it was true. Ethan ran a frustrated hand through his hair, stepping closer. "Lily, I've been by your side for years. I was there when you were pregnant. I was there when you cried yourself to sleep. I was there when you built everything from nothing." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Why can't you just choose me?" Lily's heart broke. She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Ethan, you're my best friend." A bitter laugh escaped him. "Right, just a friend." Before she could say another word, the office doors swung open. Alexander walked in, owning the room like he always did. He took one glance at Ethan, at their intertwined hands, and his silver eyes darkened dangerously. Am I interrupting something? Ethan's fists clenched. As a matter of fact, you are. Lily groaned inwardly. This was a disaster. But Alexander was unfazed. His lips curled into a dangerous smirk, his gaze locking onto Ethan with quiet dominance. You must be the best friend, the one who's been following Lily like a lost puppy all these years. Ethan's body went rigid, his anger barely controlled. At least I was there when she needed me. The words hung in the air, an undeniable challenge. A flash of something, regret, pain, flickered in Alexander's gaze. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by ice-cold control. He stepped forward, his presence commanding. That's touching, he murmured, but let's be clear about something. His eyes flickered to Lily, holding her hostage in his gaze. Lily isn't yours. His voice lowered, dark and possessive. She never was. The office felt too small, too suffocating, as the two men stared each other down. And for the first time, Lily realized the truth. This wasn't just a partnership. This was a war, and she was the prize. The tension in the room was palpable, thick like an approaching storm. Lily stood frozen between two men, both of whom had played defining roles in her life, one from her past, the other from her present. Alexander Knight, her first love, the father of her child, the man who had shattered her world and was now determined to reclaim it. Ethan Carter, her best friend, the man who had been her rock, the one who had held her together when she had fallen apart, the one who had loved her for years, but she could never love back the same way. Ethan's jaw clenched, his frustration barely contained. You don't get to come back into her life and act like you own her, Knight. Alexander tilted his head slightly, his smirk laced with quiet dominance. You mistake ownership for something else entirely. His silver eyes flicked to Lily, dark and unreadable. Lily is mine, not because I demand it, but because she's always been. Lily's breath hitched. She should have been furious, but his words, they held a weight she wasn't prepared for. Ethan let out a bitter laugh, stepping forward. You abandoned her, and now you think you can just waltz back in and erase the past? Alexander's smirk vanished. The air in the office shifted. His gaze darkened, something dangerous lurking beneath the surface. I never abandoned her, Ethan scoffed. Then where the hell were you when she was struggling? When she was alone, pregnant and terrified? When she cried herself to sleep, wondering how she was going to raise your child? Alexander's hands curled into fists, his knuckles turning white. Lily could see the flicker of something raw in his eyes, a rare crack in his perfect, controlled exterior. Guilt, regret. But it lasted only a second before he masked it with his signature cool indifference. If I had known, I would have been there. His voice was sharp as steel, cutting through the room. But I didn't, and that is something I intend to correct. Starting now. His silver eyes burned into Lily's. You kept my son from me, Lily. His voice was quiet but lethal. And now that I know the truth, you can bet I won't be leaving again. Lily sucked in a breath. This was it, the moment she had dreaded. Ethan turned to her, his eyes pleading. Lily, don't let him manipulate you. His voice softened. I've been there for you. I love you. I always have. Alexander's jaw tightened, his patience wearing thin. You don't get to love her, Carter. She was never yours to love. Ethan took a step forward, his anger boiling over. And where the hell were you while I was picking up the pieces you left behind? Before Alexander could respond, Lily snapped. Enough! Both men froze. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, frustration and exhaustion weighing down on her. This isn't about you two. This isn't some battle over who gets to claim me like a trophy. Her voice shook, but she kept her chin high. This is about me, about Theo Dot, The mention of their son seemed to cut through the fire. Alexander's expression shifted, his silver eyes flickering with something unreadable. Ethan clenched his jaw, his hands flexing at his sides. Lily exhaled slowly, her voice softer now. Ethan, I care about you. I always have, but not in the way you want me to. Pain flashed across his face. Lily. She shook her head. I can't give you the love you deserve. Ethan looked away, his shoulders tense, hurt radiating from him. Silence filled the room. Then, Alexander took a step toward her, his presence commanding but patient. You said this isn't about us. Then let's talk about what it is about. His voice was low, controlled. Theo. Lily's heart squeezed. She nodded slowly. Theo. Alexander's jaw tightened. I want to meet my son. Her stomach twisted. She had known this was coming, but knowing and facing it were two different things. Ethan turned back to her, his voice pained. Are you really going to let him just walk in and take over your life again? Lily met his eyes. He's Theo's father. Alexander's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his silver gaze, a quiet victory. Because for the first time, she wasn't running. The door to the private penthouse suite opened softly. Lily stepped inside first, her hands clammy, her heart racing. Alexander followed, his presence towering, consuming. But for the first time, he wasn't thinking about control, power, or winning. He was thinking about his son. And then he saw him. A small boy with messy black hair, dressed in a soft blue sweater, sitting on the floor with a box of colored pencils. His son. Alexander's breath caught. The little boy turned at the sound of footsteps, his silver eyes, identical to Alexander's, locking onto him. Alexander couldn't move. 5 years. 5 years of missing his first steps, his first words, his first laugh. Theo blinked up at him, then turned to Lily. Mommy, who's that? Lily's throat was tight with emotion as she crouched beside her son, gently taking his small hands. Baby, this is Alexander. She swallowed hard. He's your daddy. Silence. Then Theo tilted his head, studying Alexander with innocent curiosity. And then he smiled. You have my eyes. Theo giggled, pointing at his own silver irises. That's so cool. Alexander let out a sharp breath, one he hadn't realized he was holding. Something inside him cracked, shattered. And for the first time in years, Alexander Knight, the ruthless billionaire, the man feared by corporations and empires, felt completely, utterly vulnerable. Because in that moment, he wasn't a CEO, he was a father. And no amount of power could prepare him for this. Slowly, everything changed. Days turned into weeks, weeks into something deeper, something undeniable. What was meant to be a strictly professional partnership between Lily and Alexander had started to blur at the edges, the lines between past and present tangling into something neither of them could fully control. It began in the smallest ways. The way Alexander would pull out her chair before a meeting, his touch barely grazing her back but leaving her skin burning. The way he would watch her work, the intensity in his silver eyes impossible to ignore. The way she would catch herself looking for him in every crowded room, seeking his presence even when she told herself she didn't need to. And then there was Theo, watching Alexander with their son, laughing, playing, slowly filling the void that had unknowingly formed in their little boy's heart, was breaking down every last wall she had built. But loving Alexander Knight again was dangerous, because 5 years ago she had barely survived him. And yet despite everything, despite her fear, despite her past, her heart was betraying her once again. The city lights shimmered like fallen stars, their golden glow reflecting off the glass walls of the luxury rooftop restaurant. It was a business gala, an evening of power, wealth, and influence. But for Lily, it was something far more dangerous. Because tonight she wasn't just facing business moguls or fashion executives, she was facing him. Dressed in a tailored black tuxedo, Alexander looked like a king among men, effortlessly commanding attention, yet his silver gaze had only one focus tonight: her. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. Lily adjusted the silk strap of her ivory gown, the fabric molding perfectly against her body. She had attended countless events like this, yet tonight she felt different. Maybe it was the way Alexander's eyes lingered on her. Maybe it was the way the air between them felt heavier. Or maybe it was the way her heart had started whispering things her mind wasn't ready to accept. She knew she should stay away, keep her distance, protect herself. But when he appeared beside her, his voice a low murmur against her skin. "Dance with me." She didn't refuse. Her pulse skipped as he took her hand, his grip firm yet gentle, the warmth of his touch sending a shiver through her. As he led her onto the dance floor, their bodies moved in perfect sync, as if they had done this 1,000 times before. And maybe they had. Just in another life. She felt his hand on her waist, his thumb brushing against the silk of her gown. She should have pulled away, but she didn't. She should have kept her heart locked away, but with every slow turn, every whispered breath, every stolen glance, she felt it slipping, falling dangerously, irrevocably, back into him. And Alexander knew it. Because as he leaned in, his voice husky, his breath warm against her ear, he whispered, "You never really left me, did you?" And Lily, for the first time in 5 years, didn't have an answer. It was late when they left the gala, the crisp night air swirling around them as Alexander's private car pulled up to the entrance. Lily turned to him, ready to say goodnight, ready to put distance between them again. But then he reached for her. His fingers gently traced the edge of her jaw, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. His silver eyes burned into hers, a silent question, a battle of restraint, a war between what was right and what was inevitable. She should have stopped him. She should have walked away. But when he leaned in, when their lips finally met after 5 long, agonizing years, the world disappeared. The first touch was hesitant, almost unsure, but the moment she melted against him, Alexander lost all sense of control. The kiss deepened, slow, passionate, desperate, like he was making up for every second they had lost. Like he was reminding her that no matter how much time had passed, no matter how far she had run, she had always belonged to him. And the most dangerous part? She kissed him back, with the same fire, the same longing, the same ache that had never truly faded. And in that moment, she knew. No matter how much she fought against it, no matter how much she tried to deny it, Alexander Knight still owned her heart. And this time, she wasn't sure if she wanted to take it back.